Viewers, amidst growing concerns over inadequate employment opportunities despite the economy growing at a fast clip, new estimates from the RBI suggest a pickup in job growth. As per the central bank's KLEMS database, employment in the country grew by 4.67 crores in 2023 to 2024. While the numbers are encouraging, analysts point out that these are provisional estimates and they do not provide the disaggregated sector-wise job numbers for the latest year. Now viewers, let me walk you through this particular RBI interim report. It says the employment growth in the country jumped by nearly 6% in the fiscal 2023-2024 as compared to an increase of 3.2% recorded in FY 2023. In FY 2024, the workforce in the country increased by around 4.67 crores and is now at 64.33 crores. The latest figures are a big jump when compared to 59.6 crores in FY 2023. The data, which measures productivity at the industry level, has now been made public. Over 8 crore jobs created between 2017-18 and 2021-2022. So that's a period, viewers, of around 3 years. On an average of over 2 crore employment per year, despite the fact that the world economy was hit by COVID-19 pandemic during 2020-2021. The report also says that despite some experts, viewers, punching holes in the RBI's report, the SBI has seconded the RBI's findings, saying that the central bank's data matches with that of the government. The ASUSE survey conducted by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, or the MOSPI, puts workforce numbers at 568 million. The difference, as you can see, viewers, is minuscule. The RBI's database is at variance, however, with a report brought out by Citigroup, which said that the country should struggle or would struggle to create sufficient employment opportunities even with a 7% growth rate. The Citigroup report's claim has been refuted by the Ministry of Labour and Employment, viewers. And as you can see, let me quote out of that Citigroup report. India will need to create 1.2 crore jobs a year over the next decade to ensure that this great demographic dividend is not wasted. But the Citigroup says the growth rate at present will only allow for the creation of 80 to 90 lakh jobs, which, viewers, is about half of what is required. The findings of the Citigroup have resulted in a slugfest between the opposition and the BJP. The Congress has cited the Citigroup report to target the government, saying that the crisis has been accentuated with the decimation of job-creating MSMEs through the Tughlqian demonetization and a hastily rushed through GST and rising imports from China, with his economic policies, which obviously is a reference to Modi, that favour only large conglomerates. The non-biological Prime Minister has created India's highest unemployment rate in 45 years. The NDA, of course, the government is citing the RBI report and says that the Citigroup is not equipped to go into the data in a holistic manner. And therefore, it is the Labour Ministry statement that must be adhered to, because the Periodic Labour Force Survey, or PLFS, and the RBI's CLEMS data suggests India has generated more than 8 crore jobs from 2017-18 to 2021-2022. This translates into an average of over 2 crore employment or jobs per year, despite the fact that the world economy was hit by COVID-19 pandemic during 2020-21, which contradicts the assertion of India's inability to generate sufficient employment. This significant employment creation demonstrates the effectiveness of various government initiatives aimed at boosting employment across sectors. Viewers, let's get a sense really of how bad or how well the employment market is doing. We don't usually focus so much on the micro, but today let's get into the niche. And we have with us two very informed voices. Sanju Verma, national spokesperson of the BJP. She's also, of course, been in the financial sector in the past and has written books on the economy. We also have with us Dipanshu Mohan, Director, Center for New Economics Studies. Now, Dipanshu Mohan, we always find that certain sections of experts seem to suggest we're not doing as well on the job creation front when the data, at least the data that I have sort of pointed you towards, suggests that it's not as bad as it is being made out to be. So, can you explain why we have this glaring contradiction between the data and the perceived commentary that we get from certain sections of the commentariat?
Thank you, Rahul, for having me here. And one of the first things that I think needs to be said out loud is when you're looking or interpreting the Indian employment data, the complexity of the layers associated with how the data is interpreted could be subject to many different considerations. One of the big factors is that when we look at India's employment landscape, 80% of India's workforce is generally part of what we call as the unorganized informal space. And sometimes we don't get a very good accurate reading. But when you do look at the data that the RBI has come out with its recent report, which is consistent with many of the other surveys, I do want to say that CMIE and some of the other private survey agencies which do a far more frequent, regular surveying of employment data, the numbers are more or less consistent. There is, at the very outset, a better performance over the last year or 2 years on employment rate, that is in terms of creation of jobs that are being added annually. And that, as you pointed out in your opening remarks. However, what is really happening is that the unemployment rate, which has been at a certain level, particularly in the last year, it was roughly touching 8%, and anything above 8% was only seen in 2020. That was the year of the pandemic and the lockdown. What is happening is the unemployment rate is not going down as faster as it would when the employment rate goes up. And as a result of this, what makes anybody to look at the macro numbers more closely is what we define in more technical terms is the output employment gap, which the Citigroup report talks about. So as the output goes up, if your employment is not going at the same pace or is not allowing for a similar increase in the level of employment as with an additional 1% growth in GDP, you would find the situation that even if the employment goes up by 2 crore jobs annually, it will not result in reduction of unemployment. Now that, to me, is a far more structural concern with the India's landscape right now, which is why if you were expecting more jobs to be created, why is that youth unemployment rate is not drastically coming down? Mostly.
I think I've just lost you, Mr. Mohan. Your audio has dipped.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
So that was one of the first points. That was the first point. So job creation versus job absorption is a key factor. The second is that the rural picture is not changing much. And for me, that is far more concerning, because if you look at the urban scenario, which is where most of the jobs have been created over the last 20 years of India's job story, it's true that the urban areas are reasonably doing better now as what they were doing 5 or 6 years back, but they're not creating enough jobs to absorb the distress that is there in the rural sector. And that regional picture comes out from the database. Finally, one of the things, the labor force participation rate is not also increased at the same level as you would expect the employment rate to create. So there are not many women added to the labor force. If the employment rate was going up, you would expect that more female to male labor force participation rate would go up. The drastic change would also allow for greater entrepreneurship amongst the workers. But that, if you see with the self-employment rising, is only indicating further informalization,
Okay,
not
so
higher
you're
increase in
saying there are
business.
three broad problem areas, and Sanju Verma, I think you heard Mr. Mohan. So I just want to quickly recap for your benefit. Number one, of course, jobs absorption is a problem. That while yes, jobs are going up, the unemployment rate is not fundamentally coming down, relatively speaking, because we're not creating those many jobs. Number one. Number two, he says the problem is that the jobs are not being produced in the urban sector so that a large number of people can migrate away from the rural sector like you see in some of the advanced economies. And then, of course, he talks about the participation, labor participation rate, which for women particularly is a matter of concern.
Okay. You know, Rahul, I'm so glad that you're having a debate on jobs and employment, because amidst the din and noise of everything else, we often forget the core and moot issues that need to be addressed via sensible discussions. I have a lot of respect for Mr. Mohan, but I beg to disagree on a few counts, and I will pointedly rebut each one of them. First and foremost, the unemployment rate. There has been a lot of hullabaloo that unemployment rate, as per CMIE, continues to be in the region of 7.5% to 8% on an average in the last couple of years. But the NSSO figures given by the government say a different story. So let me tell you that CMIE is owned by Ajay Shah and Mahesh Vyas. And we all know that Ajay Shah and Mahesh Vyas were advisors to the Congress under the UPA 1 dispensation. CMIE is a private body. And given its loyalties to the Congress, what it says is certainly circumspect for people like me who come from the BJP. But let me tell you what the NSSO says. The NSSO, which has far more credibility than the CMIE, says that the unemployment rate in India was 6.1% in FY 2018, went down to 5.8% in FY 19, 4.8% in FY 20, 4.2% in FY 21, 4.1% in FY 22, and 3.2% in FY 23. And I assume in FY 24, the final numbers are not out, the unemployment rate should be sub 3%. First and foremost, my limited point is unemployment rate has certainly fallen from 6% plus to barely 3% odd in the last couple of years. My second point is this, that the employment rate itself, the growth in employment rate has risen from 3.2% in FY 23 to 6% in FY 24. Now comes the most interesting point. People say, the RBI says that as of March 2024, in FY 24, we added 4.7 crore jobs, and the total number of people employed are roughly 64 crore people, which is hard to believe. My pointed rebuttal to Modi naysayers is this. Assuming the total population of India is 140 crore, and assuming that the adult population of India is 94 crore, and these are figures in the public domain, which Sanju Verma is not throwing off her hat. Given that 64 crore people means that 68% of our adult population is suitably employed, and 46% of our population compared to the overall population of 140 crores is employed. I want to ask, if 68% of our adult population is suitably employed, assuming 64 crore people are gainfully employed in the workforce, why is it so tough to believe that? For any developing nation which is growing at 7% plus, and mind you, we have grown at an average of 8.36% in the last 3 years, if 64 crore people are suitably employed, that is welcome news. Rather than criticizing it, you should actually be welcoming it. Point number 4, and a very important point made by Mr. Mohan. Let's talk about rural versus urban divide. Anybody who follows textbook economics knows that for the longest time, Rahul, the primary sector, as in agriculture and allied sectors, agriculture, fisheries, animal husbandry, these have accounted for 49% of the workforce. But I saw something very interesting in the RBI report. RBI says of the 64 crore people employed, 25 crore are employed in the primary sector, as in agriculture and allied sectors, which means as you and me speak today, not 49%, only 39% of our labor force is employed in agriculture and allied sectors, and 61% is employed in the secondary and tertiary sectors, which I think is excellent news. once again signifying that when an economy makes a transition from a middle income growing economy to a high growth economy, there is always a shift from agriculture to industry and services. And that is precisely what is happening. Earlier, 49% of the people were employed in primary sector. Now 39% people are employed in primary sector. Earlier, only 51% people were employed in the secondary and tertiary sectors. Now 61% people are employed in the secondary and tertiary sectors, which is symptomatic of any high growth economy. I will end by just giving you one argument. Please bear with me. And this is the most vital part of my argument. This is data by the World Bank. World Bank says every $10 million worth of investment in a middle income growing economy, roughly, irrespective of sector, adds 600 jobs. $10 million adds 600 jobs, which means $100 million adds 6,000 jobs, $1 billion adds 60,000 jobs, $10 billion adds 6 lakh jobs, $100 billion adds 60 lakh jobs, and $1 trillion adds 6 crore jobs. And why did I give you this breakup? Bear with me for 10 seconds. Today, India's infrastructure sector is worth $1.4 trillion, which means if we assume that $10 billion creates 600 jobs, then $1.4 trillion has created 8.4 crore jobs in India. And the retail sector is also worth $1.4 trillion, which is another 8.4 crore jobs. And just bear with me for 10 seconds, Rahul, please. The auto industry sector is worth $122 billion, which means we have created 74 lakh jobs. The travel and tourism sector is worth $178 billion, which means we have created 1.1 crore jobs. And last but not the least, the construction, transport and logistics sector is worth $320 billion, which means we have created an additional 1.94 crore jobs. I've given you the sectoral breakdown.
Mr. Mohan, you heard Sanju Verma. How do you respond to some of the points that she has raised? And I will then come back to those questions with her.
Yeah, I mean, all points well taken. My only concern is, as I raised in the first part of my opening remarks, that employment rate that is being cited right now with much appreciation of what has been happening in the state of the Indian economy is not doing enough with respect to the demand for the jobs that are required, even if you take the worker population.
No, but she made some very pointed arguments. And she said, number one, CMI problem, because, as a BJP spokesperson, someone with a Congress history, she has a problem with that. Okay, number one, fine. We can debate that. That's more of a subjective opinion. But setting that aside, she made certain pointed interventions, stating statistics to show that, look, we have created jobs, and I'm giving you the breakdown, sectoral breakdown.
Yeah, so, sorry, could I respond?
Yeah, go ahead. Can you hear me?
Yeah, so I can.
Go
so
ahead.
As I was saying that one of the concerns that initially was being highlighted when I made the observation is, first of all, employment rate is not growing at the pace at which the overall output or the GDP growth is going at, which points to what is classically defined is an output employment.
No, but what is, substantiate that by pointing out a symptom or two. Otherwise, it becomes difficult.
So I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
So much of the growth which is right now happening in employment is in lower paying service sector jobs.
Okay.
Manufacturing is no longer creating the kind of value added employment creation that traditionally has been the case. And one of the reasons is that the MSME sector has traditionally not been, it's been the job driver, but it's not done very well over the last 6-7 years. There are factors which have driven. I don't want to get into a lot of that. It's a separate debate.
Yeah, that's a separate debate.
But the sectoral allocation of employment right now is a lot in services. Now, to what extent this is being driven by the nature of interventions that have been taken by the government itself, and that to me is a far more worrying point, because much of the interventions that the government
so
is
you're
making,
talking about the demo lag, and on the other hand, of course, the GST. Okay, fair enough.
No. Just on the fact that, as I was saying, that the government's intervention has largely been in manufacturing through PLI and other schemes,
yes,
where the government is providing that excess subsidies. But the employment creation within manufacturing is not happening in the labor intensive sectors.
Okay.
And a lot of the jobs creation is happening in services, while a lot of the service sector jobs are not happening in educated employment categories.
I got it.
Which is why you see that the unemployment rate for the youth, the more educated they are, the more and the higher chance or probability of them being unemployed,
okay,
has still not changed.
So
it's still above 10%.
there is variation. Okay, but Sanju Verma, I wanted to just ask you. You gave us a bunch of statistics, very informed, obviously. You've obviously done your calculations, but then just 4 points, and could you quickly answer why, therefore, is Manrega allocation so high? If you're saying that, look, we have turned the corner, then why? Why are we continuing with these very expensive food subsidies? Why is rural demand and retail demand, since you mentioned retail, specifically the retail sector, down? And why is private capital investment also down? Obviously, there is a problem.
Rahul, I'll answer each of your queries. You've obviously done your homework too. First and foremost, to Mr. Mohan's remark that labor force participation is low, I would urge him to look at the PLFS survey by the NSSO. In the last 2 years, the urban labor force participation rate has been the highest ever in the last 3 decades. The rural labor force participation rate is 67%, the highest in 3 decades. The female labor force participation rate at 37% needs to improve, but is again the highest in 4 decades. And the male labor force participation rate at 78% is the highest in 3 decades. So whether you look at it sectorally, whether you look at it urban versus rural, man versus woman, the labor force participation rate has been rising and has been moving northwards. Point number one. Point number two on Manrega. Our average outlay for Manrega every year on an average has been anywhere between 73,000 crores to 75,000 crore, barring 1 or 2 years when it rose to more than 92,000 crores. But the good thing is, earlier, during the Congress regime, Manrega was all about simply digging, no productive employment. You simply had to give people, say 2,000 rupees or 3,000 rupees or 5,000 or 10,000 for every month that they work for 100 days at a stretch. Now it is not about simply digging endlessly. It is about helping build bridges. It is about helping build culverts. It is about redeploying workforce and utilizing them for building river embankments. So Manrega today means productively giving gainful employment to rural youth and those in semi-urban areas. And every single year, 200 million man days of employment are provided via Manrega. How much? 200 million man days of employment. Point number two. Point number three on retail demand. I want to just say this. I always say the proof of the pudding is in the eating. If I tell you, Rahul Shivshankar, 3 years back or 4 years back, India's retail sector was at $400 billion. Today it is at $1.4 trillion, slated to go up to $2.7 trillion by 2029. You will simply say, oh, these are just big numbers. So I will tell you what your audience can understand. Every month, not every year, every month in India, we sell close to 3.5 to 4 lakh cars. Maruti itself sells about 1.6 lakh cars a month, which means Maruti Suzuki sells 4 to 5 cars every minute. We sell 20 lakh motorcycles every month. You heard that right. 20 lakh motorcycles every month, 5 lakh scooters every month, 1 lakh tractors every month. And you're still telling me that retail demand is not there? Of course, retail demand has been on a surge. And I'll tell you a very interesting figure. India's banking sector, the credit growth in the retail segment is at 20%.
Yeah, but the last quarter, ma'am, the last quarter was not very good in terms of returns.
I'll just finish, Rahul.
Okay, it might be cyclical, you're saying, whether this, that, the other, heat wave, whatever.
Rahul, bear with me for 10 seconds.
Okay, yeah. Okay, go ahead.
I simply want to say this to naysayers. An economy which grew at 9.7% in FY22, 7.2% in FY23, provisionally at 8.36% in FY24, a country which at constant prices has a GDP of 174 lakh crore and nominal GDP at current prices at 263 lakh crore. Why can't it have 64 crore people gainfully employed? Why can't it be adding 0.7
Gainfully,
crore jobs every year?
viewers, it's the gainful part which many people quibble over. Anyhow, viewers, we've tried to address, we've had an informed discussion, we've heard two sides. Mr. Mohan, I've run out of time, I'm sorry. And also Sanju Verma, I've completely run out of time. I have to also go across to Rajiv Kumar, economist and author, former vice chairman of the Niti Aayog, to get perhaps another perspective on the facts. We've heard two sides today, viewers. I'm not saying that they are completely at loggerheads, but certainly there were divergences. I won't say that anyone had descended into suggesting that the other person was misleading on facts and figures, but certainly there is at least perceptorially a major gap. So let's try to close this gap and let's go bridge this gap. Let's go across to Rajiv Kumar. Thank you, Mr. Kumar, for speaking with me. Look, on Crux, I don't try to take a position. I try to hear other people and let the viewer understand where the debate lies within the issue. So I want to ask you this, Mr. Rajiv Kumar. Look, we've just had a set of numbers that have been put out by the RBI. This is about the pickup, so to speak, in employment rate. Now, first of all, how robust are these numbers? How dependable is this RBI survey? And are actually jobs growing? And if they are growing in a meaningful way? Are they providing gainful employment? Let me put it that way.
Yeah. Hi, Rahul. Wonderful to be here on your channel again. And yes, these RBI numbers, which are called the CLEMS database, are, in my view, one of the more reliable databases that we've got. So this is continued for a while. For now the last 11 years they've been collecting this database, and they do it as a part of estimating the overall productivity levels in the country. So when they estimate employment, I think they do it both for the skilled and the unskilled variety. And this number that they've shown, which is that the employment has increased by 6.4%, and that in the decade 2004 to 2014, there has been creation of 8.9 crore jobs in the non-agricultural sector. I think I would go by them. I would abide by them, because RBI's methodology is quite robust, and I think we need to take that. We need to take those seriously. That's one part of it. The other part of it is that the only other sort of is that the RBI numbers show that employment in agriculture has gone up from 25.3 crore to 26.5 crore. Now that is a contrary trend. One would have expected, and one expects all the time, employment in agriculture to become less and less, because as people find jobs in manufacturing and in services, which are by definition higher productivity jobs. So therefore, it does seem that a part of the employment has been created by this increase in agricultural labor, which I'm afraid cannot be explained by a rise in agricultural output of that level. So that does show that there is some decline in productivity, and that is something that we need to address and reverse. And we have to try and take steps so that we drain labor out of agriculture into other more productive sectors.
So, Mr. Kumar, then why aren't people moving out of agriculture? Is it because there are no jobs to be had in other sectors, the service sector, manufacturing? What is the reason?
The RBI data shows that jobs have increased, both in industry, partially, and in services, but probably not enough to drain labor out of agriculture. So what they're able to do, the increase in employment in industry and services, is absorbing the increase in workforce in the urban sectors, which is already there. And so they are the ones who are getting employed and not, being able to, take the load out of agriculture. And the other part is that, while the small and medium enterprises, they've shown that their employment has gone above 20 crore, that growth is not as high as it could be or as it should be, because that's the first step that agricultural labor takes to get out of agriculture.
So,
That's
so
the other
you're
part.
saying
Third
MSME
part is
sector has not.
MSA.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now why is this the case? Why should the MSME sector lag?
No, because they lag because of several reasons, and one of the major reasons is that the pandemic hit them much harder than it hit the large sector. I've been a votary of what I call the K-shaped growth, which is that the upper leg of the K has grown very rapidly, and that accounts for all the increases in the industrial and in the services sector that you see in the RBI data. But the lower leg of the K, which is the SMEs, have not grown as much as they should to be absorb the labor from agriculture. But the good news, Rahul, is that the labor participation rates, as depicted, as given by the RBI, and also the PLFS, this Periodic Labor Force Survey, has shown a good sharp increase. Now that's very good news, because that means that people are beginning to come back to the labor market and have not given up the hope for finding employment. And I think the numbers is that, the rates have gone up from 53.5% in 2019-20, that's a labor participation rate, to something like 58%. Now that's very good augury, because that means that people are now trying more to remain in the workforce rather than dropping out and go into this category of self-employed or subsidiary employment, etc., which is often seen as a proxy for disguised unemployment. That's very good news, and shows that formal sector has grown.
But many people will say that, okay, fine, labor participation rate is growing, but the quality of jobs is not satisfactory, and the skew towards joblessness is greater amongst graduates, engineering graduates, this, that, the other, people who sort of feed the larger structural upper parts of the manufacturing block.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. So,
No,
yeah. Can you explain?
There is merit in that argument. I recently wrote a piece also in the Hindu Business Line, which shows that our leading institutions like the IITs and the IIMs, their placement records have not, are not as good as they should be, as they have been in the past, and which means, which shows that the upper echelons of our workforce are finding it more difficult, to get those jobs. So there is, Rahul, a much greater need for granular data, more surveys, a better understanding of our labor market. And
so let me ask you pointedly, Mr. Kumar, do you believe that the government is slightly on the defensive on this issue and therefore hesitates in putting out data or commissioning these surveys? Because look, I mean, you talked about this K-shaped recovery, which many people have sort of tried to, within government, have tried to sort of, in one way, dismiss as not quite the case. But you are sort of a person who believes that there has been definitively a K-shaped recovery. You have the opposition that says that, look, half the problem is that the interventions that were made, whether it was demo, which happened when, of course, you were also, part of the Niti Aayog, and of course, later the GST, the rollout hasn't been perfect. So that's hit the MSME sector very hard. And of course, you've had the once in a century impact of a pandemic.
Yeah. No, Rahul, on the employment front, I think the government has put out the data and that it can. There is a periodic labor force survey which comes out every 3 months, and updated the data. The last is July 23. They've just released what is called the SUs, the annual survey of
That's right.
Informed unorganized sector employment. That's come out. Now the RBI has come out. So I think the government cannot be accused at all of not releasing the data on employment, and they're taking the bull by the horns. Now the fact is, what I'm saying is that we need more granular data. For example, to the question that you asked as to what is happening to our graduates, what's happening to our engineering and management graduates. Are they getting the kind of job that they need? We don't have the data for that, and we need the data for that, because that's when right policies can be made on this account. So I think because employment is such an important issue in our country and remains the issue despite the subsidies that you are handing out,
Yeah.
and despite the sort of support that you're giving, because employment is the need of the hour, I think the more data we have and the more granular data we have, the better off we would be to able to frame the right kind of policies here.
Let me draw your attention to the Citigroup report. Now, the Citigroup report is an interesting one because it says that, look, we need to create about 1.2 crore jobs a year over the next decade if you are going to harness the power of this demographic dividend. But unfortunately, even at the present rate of growth, this is assuming that it stays at the mark that it is at, will only allow for the creation of 80 to 90 lakh jobs. Now, the government is contesting this. Do you believe the Citigroup report has got it right, or are they sort of off the mark here?
No, the Citigroup has got it right in terms of the volume of jobs that we need to create.
Okay.
Where it is wrong completely, and is shown by the RBI data, is that by saying that the government is unable to create those jobs. The RBI report tells us that between 2013-14 and 2023-24, 12.3 crore jobs were created. Now that if it's a 10-year period, you can see that it is 1.2 crore per annum, which is what the Citigroup says we need to do. So that's what's done. Now, but the point, however, is that the report also points out that in the decade prior to that, full 10 years, only about 3 crore jobs were created. So there's a backlog. Now that backlog has not been cleared. The 12.3 crores are enough to absorb the increase in the labor force, but not probably to create, to absorb to clear the backlog. Now, the most surprising thing, but a very good news, is that in 23-24, the RBI report says that 4.7 crore jobs were created. Now, and I'm saying surprising because I would have to look at the numbers as to whether these reconcile with the output expansion in the economy. But that's a lot of new workers, 47 million workers. Now, what did they produce? Did they produce a much higher level of agricultural output? Did they produce a much higher level of industrial or exports? Now, we need to reconcile that. We need to tango that, to get that done. Now, that's not been done. And because if, for example, the output expansion is not that much, that would mean that the productivity level has gone down.
Right.
A larger number of workers are producing a relatively, a smaller output, as it were, and that's not the best news also. But here, Rahul, we need to emphasize our exports, because our exports are the one which generates the jobs. They are the employment intensive scheme, and I think the rate of growth of exports, I think, is a key factor, for us to get labor out of agriculture and get the more skilled jobs and generate opportunities with them.
Well, thank you, Mr. Rajiv Kumar. At least you have set this, at least you have made some things very clear, which is that we are moving in the right direction, and most importantly, that this data that the RBI has put out is quite robust. Now, viewers, that is a relief, because, you hear so many people talk about the quality of the data itself, saying that it could be compromised by political biases, which is a way of hinting that the RBI is under pressure to goose numbers, to cook them up. So at least Rajiv Kumar has settled that debate. We can definitely go ahead and take this data at face value. Now, of course, when it comes to Mr. Rajiv Kumar, my final question to you, assessing the quality of the jobs, that is the one place where you are saying that we lack granular data, isn't it? That's the one place we need to focus on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, and it's important, because if, for example, our jobs are not being able to absorb the graduates from the management schools or the IITs or the engineering colleges, then there's a problem. And there is some data which shows that educated graduate unemployment has gone up, and has gone up quite significantly. So while the overall unemployment has come down to 3.2%, I believe that number of the graduate unemployment is higher, above 15%. Now that needs to be tackled, because that's the, if you like, the creme de la creme of our workforce, which needs to be employed gainfully. And as I said, very much could be done in exports, and in sectors like tourism or health and education.
So very quickly, what do you expect from the budget now? In the next few days, we're going to have the budget on the 23rd. Do you think that there's going to be a thrust on creating quality jobs or gainful employment? And if so, how will that be sort of undertaken?
Well, that has to be the focus. In fact, let me go a little sort of on the extreme and out of the way and say that India today needs a target for employment growth more than the target for GDP growth. Because if you get employment growth, the commensurate GDP growth will fall out, from there. I hope the budget will do that, and the budget will then take the steps required, to boost employment growth in sectors, as I said, and I repeat myself, which is, for example, exports, construction, that these are employment intensive things, small and medium enterprises, and make sure that there are enough incentives for capacities to expand there, because that's what will generate employment in larger numbers, which is what we require. As I said, despite the RBI numbers, which are good, which are very positive, we have a backlog which we need to clear, and that backlog, is quite significant. And unless that is cleared, we will remain, in a stressful situation as far as the employment conditions, state of employment is concerned.
Well, the exports, very finally, the exports were always a sort of sunrise story for India. Why have they slowed? Many people say there are global constraints, headwinds, and they are going to continue, sir.
Yeah, they are going to continue. The global economy is more fragmented than what it was earlier. Many countries are, adopting protectionist policies, but we have to face that and we have to live with that. And there are countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh who have successfully increased their share in global markets. We have to do the same. There is no reason for our textile exports to be smaller than Bangladesh's garment and textile exports. No, we have. And one of my major suggestions has been, and I'm doing some work on it, that it is time for us to now design state-specific export policies, because a policy which is relevant for the Punjab cannot be relevant for Tamil Nadu. Punjab is a double landlocked state, so what they can export is going to be very different from what Odisha and Gujarat and Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu can. So I think it's time, because we are a continental-sized economy with this huge diversity, that we want to design now state-specific export promotion policies, look at what are those competitive and comparative advantages, and then work with the state governments to try and exploit those advantages, to try and achieve, the rates of growth. This will also mean that you will have state government ownership and involvement in export promotion, which is absent today. And I must confess that, our share of world markets has remained stagnant in manufactured exports and agriculture. There's no reason for that, and we can't afford that. So given whatever there is, and it's a more difficult world out there than what it was previously, we have to live with it and still make sure that we expand our share in global markets as we go forward.
Well, thank you, Mr. Rajiv Kumar, for that comprehensive interview and perspective on what we need to do to turn things around for the jobs sector, viewers. As I told you, I began by saying that we don't usually focus sectorally on issues, but today we've spent 1 hour discussing just the jobs issue. I hope you appreciate the output of our efforts. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you very much.
मंत्री जी का कैसे बोल पा रहे हैं भाई? आप लोगों ने तो खुद ही संविधान को तहस-नहस करके रख दिया, उसके मर्म को आहत करके रख दिया, चुने हुए प्रतिनिधियों को जेल में रखे, ह्यूमन राइट एक्टिविस्ट जेल में है, फादर स्टेन स्वामी दुनिया से चले गए। आपने तो ईडी, आईटी, सीबीआई के माध्यम से संविधान के पन्नों को तार-तार कर दिया। इमरजेंसी के दौरान माफी मांगने वाले कौन-कौन लोग थे? सब आप ही के संगठन के थे या नागपुर वाले संगठन के थे। वो चिट्ठियां पब्लिक डोमेन में है, तो दोहरा चरित्र नहीं होना चाहिए। संविधान ने आपको एक झटका दिया है इस मैंडेट में, उस झटके से उबरने के लिए बेहतर चीजें तलाश करिए।
सरकार के इस फैसले की भूरी भूरी प्रशंसा, जिसमें 25 जून को संविधान की हत्या दिवस के रूप में मनाने का फैसला किया है, ये लोकतंत्र पर सबसे बड़ा प्रहार था। मुझे भी आपातकाल में जेल जाने का मौका मिला था। परिवारजनों को भी तकलीफ हुई, मित्रजनों को भी तकलीफ हुई, और हमारे उस पराक्रम को आज मान्यता मिली है, ये प्रसन्नता है।
Very good evening. You're watching CNN News 18. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. Let's tell you the latest about the Bypoll results. In a boost for the opposition, the India bloc has won 10 out of 13 seats in the assembly bypolls that were held for 13 assembly constituencies across 7 states. The TMC has swept Bengal and has won all the 4 seats. On the other hand, Congress has won 2 out of 3 seats in the hill state of Himachal Pradesh, leaving 1 seat for the BJP. Chief Minister Sukhvinder Singh Sukhu's wife has won the Dehra seat. The Congress has won 2 seats in Uttarakhand as well. The Aam Aadmi Party has won the Jalandhar seat. As for Madhya Pradesh, BJP candidate Kamlesh Shah has won the Amarwada bypoll. It's important to note that Kamlesh Shah was a former Congress leader, and Tamil Nadu's Vikravandi seat has been secured by the DMK candidate Aniyur Siva. Vikravandi seat was especially important in the background of the recent Tamil Nadu Hooch tragedy. Congress has also won the Badrinath seat in Uttarakhand. On that note, let's also bring you some reactions.